Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our top security trends in smart cities panel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Diana Blass with Current Insights. Thanks for joining us today on our panel about security in smart cities. I think we can all agree that as we become more connected, the risks are just growing. You look at cities like Atlanta. I read that New Orleans is facing $1 million from its cybersecurity costs, and just this week we saw Las Vegas had its own compromise. So really, what's the solution here? I'm joined by a panel of experts here. Samir Sharma with Intel, Alissa Knight, you just started your own company, and you're a professional hacker, a content influencer, and Amit Dalton with Karamba Security. Thanks for joining us. Why don't you first just tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Sure, I'll start. Hi, everyone. My name is Samir Sharma. I'm the Global General Manager for Smart Cities and Intelligent Transportation at Intel. It's my team's job to take everything we're doing at Intel in areas of 5G, AI, edge computing, and put it all together with our partners to bring solutions. Everything from smart security cameras to traffic management systems to how do we improve the running of trains, how do we manage airports better. So the idea is take a holistic view, take a view of the infrastructure, not just in terms of the physical implementation, but the digitization of this infrastructure as well. In terms of my own background, I've spent 20+ years in the tech industry, everything from embedded to network infrastructure to now IoT. And it's been a fascinating journey. The one thing I would say is I have never been as excited as I am right now in terms of the tools at our disposal and how we can use those tools to really impact the quality of life for virtually every citizen on this planet.
Cool. Good morning, everyone. I'm Alissa Knight. I am a recovering hacker of 20 years. End bio, just kidding. I am the managing partner of Knight Inc. What I do is I blend hacking with content creation and influencer marketing. So cybersecurity vendors will come to me and have me write content for them, and I'll prove the efficacy of their technology by blowing stuff up, hacking things. And what's unique about my content is it's written from the perspective of an adversary. So it's very adversarial analysis to prove that the technology actually does what it says it does. And that's pretty much me. I used to live in Stuttgart, Germany, working for some of the largest automotive makers, hacking connected cars. My focus historically has been in embedded systems. Case in point, a cybersecurity vendor called SentinelOne came to me and said, hey, write a paper for us on IoT security products. Embedded systems are a huge attack surface. And I thought, well, how about I drive my car into the parking lot of a bank, hack the CCTV cameras in the parking lot from my car, and then pivot into the bank and show how your technology could have prevented it. And that's exactly what I did. So that's the style of writing, the kind of things that I do. And yes, I'm a chick. Girls hack too.
And great outfit, by the way.
Sparkly. Sparkles.
I'm Dutan. I'm CEO of Karamba Security. Karamba Security focuses on exactly try and eliminate what Alissa was talking about, is embedded cybersecurity. And we are focused in the last 3.5 years on embedded cybersecurity in IoT devices, IoT, automotive. For us, it's just the same. The way we approach IoT cybersecurity is basically sealing working with the vendors and sealing their code. And we'll talk about it if we have time, about technologies and multi-layer cybersecurity. But the different approaches to cybersecurity, some people looked at it, at least we thought it was the wrong approach, and I'm trying to be somewhat provocative in this panel, not being too polite. But people thinking about IoT devices, the first generation, was we have like a car. We have a data center on wheels. Wrong. We're talking about platforms that are safety-centric. There is no time to deal with anomaly detection and remediation. And what do you do with 80 million new cars and 1.2 billion cars at any given time? as existing inventory on the roads, and everything is getting connected. I'll share with you later some slides about different aspects of IoT vulnerabilities that we daily are embedded in our lives, part of it, and we are not even aware how easy it is to compromise those devices. Think about IoT device as a machine in the middle. And the message to the vendors is, don't put your customers at risk. And basically, this is what happens. If you talk about high-volume air conditioners, high-rise buildings, or generators, or tanks, or any whatever you, once compromised, they compromise the asset behind them. And we try and block those attempts to compromise the IoT devices.
Okay. Well, Samir, I wanted to start with you first because I know that Intel's played a big role in building smart cities, and we can even debate, what is a smart city today? But how did the security risks become so great as they are today?
Yeah, maybe I can start with sort of the big picture view. As I said, my role is global, so I spend time with agencies in Singapore, in China, in India, in Europe, and obviously here in the US and Latin America as well. And we tend to take a macro global view of what's going on. So if you look at the numbers, 3 million people are moving into urban areas every week. That's the population of Chicago. So together as a global community, we are creating 50 new Chicagos every year. We all feel it, right? Lack of parking, traffic congestion, air pollution issues, affordable housing issues. This is a people-centric view, so that's what's going on. We're adding urban population. We're going to continue adding urban population. I'm sure you've heard about this during the 2 days of Smart City sessions here. But there is another parallel view that we need to take, which is what we call a data-centric view. When we are bringing all these people in, and we are instrumenting infrastructure to accommodate this new urban population, we're also creating a lot more data. And for the first time, we instituted a study to say, globally, how much data is coming in? And the answer was roughly 16.5 zettabytes. I'll talk a bit about the size of this data in a minute. But before I go there, this is not a 2050 estimate. This is a 2020 estimate. It's going to happen this year. It's already upon us. Zettabytes, 1 zettabyte is 10 raised to the power 21. And sometimes these large numbers lose meaning. So an analogy I like to share is if this cup of tea or coffee represents 1 gigabyte of data, which is how we think about storage on our phone or bandwidth capacity, 16.5 zettabytes of data is enough coffee to fill up the entire Great Wall of China. It is the amount of data you would create if you're recording nonstop for 35,000 hours, full high definition. It is the amount of data on 250 billion DVDs. And here is the second thing that's remarkable about what I just shared. This is not the total amount of data. This is the new data we are layering on this multi-layered cake year after year after year. And the size of this data is going to keep increasing. I'm spending so much time on this data point, pun intended, to emphasize that the tsunami of data is already upon us. This is not a future decades from now phenomena. It's already happening. And we have 2 ways of tackling it. The first one is to keep doing what we've done in the past, which is a brute force method, or try and be more intelligent, use all the tools at our disposal, AI, edge computing, inference at the edge, 5G connectivity, data center capacity for storage and compute, and turn these knobs appropriately so we're effectively able to harness the data, because ultimately it's about not the data, but the insights. We want to know if a traffic congestion is about to build up, can we read out traffic? If a parking spot became available, we want to be able to advertise it to people looking for parking in a city. If an accident happened, we want to know how severe was the accident so we can give the appropriate first responders on the scene. How this conversation is relevant to the security discussion is as follows. You've got more data, you've got more systems, and with fellow panelists, we were discussing the journey from embedded to IoT. Embedded was a wonderful world where we programmed devices, we left them alone. They would sit there for 10, 15, 20 years. The only time you would go and touch them is if they don't work or if you need to replace a battery. Not so anymore. All of these devices are connected. They have compute capability, which means if you look at the number of people, you look at the number of infrastructure systems, you look at the number of embedded devices, and then you look at the data. this is creating a very vast potential attack surface. That's the security industry parlance. I'll let my panelists who are much more well-versed in security emphasize what the solutions will look like. But this is something that we think about all the time in conversations with our partners, in conversation with our end customers. And I always encourage them to think about security not as a bolt-on, but security as built-in. You got to think about this on day zero.
Right, they say that security needs to be built in from the start, and I think what's so interesting is that you brought slides along with you that showcase that one of the biggest issues in cybersecurity rests in the R&D department. So, what's the problem here? Why are we building insecure devices?
Yeah, I said I'm going to be provocative, but I still want them to be my clients. So it's kind of a oxymoron. No, it's not. Can we present the slides? Yep. So everything is connected. A lot of data is being transferred. And exactly like it was said, used to be numb devices. They would sit there for decades and nothing happens. And now everything is connected. It's connected for functionality, for maintenance, for what have you, even upgrade and updates, and things are becoming more and more advanced. It's kind of you used the word tsunami, I'll try and borrow that from you. It's a tsunami on the R&D people. It's a different design concept. You need to think now about connectivity and not about functionality. Because functionality has been there for decades. We know how to develop controllers on air conditioners and generators, et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden, it's connected. Is it the same? Is it the same machine? Let's use an example. So I brought some examples because not all people understand how does an attack looks like, how easy it is or difficult it is. So thousands of industrial devices are using BACnet. BACnet is building automation and control. So every high-rise building probably using that protocol and just using a simple, available tool. Anyone now can even roam and use Shodan and just start scanning the internet. And guess what you'll find? I asked one of my engineers, do me a favor, just run some scans so I can present something from real cases. That was done a couple of days ago. Over 7,000 exposed pieces of equipment, different geographies. You see 5,000 in the United States, Canada, et cetera, et cetera. The internet is a small village. You get everywhere in a click of a button. So this is a device that is based in a high-rise building, and it is a controller of an emergency generator, and it is connected through an IoT device, and that IoT device was exposed by Shodan. So that generator we can turn on and turn. You see here the blurry figures there because we tried to mask the IP addresses of those devices and just took one line. And he marked the device specifically that talks about the emergency generator for the 11th floor from your living room. Shodan, IP address, compromise, shut it. This is one example. This is more sensitive. And we have made a disclosure on that so we can mention, because if you run down to the lowest part of the slide, the IP address belonged to a nuclear site in Russia. And it's a chiller. I don't know what it's chiller, but we hope it's not a chiller off the core. Again, exposed the same way. We mask the IP address. So you're sitting in your living room, you take in a ready available tool, you expose an IP address that you can manipulate or command because somebody left at the web page the username and the password. This is not an odd case. So you got everything there. Just use the username, use the password, you're in. Now you can do whatever you want with the device. And they did that for remote maintenance, I guess, and control. But you could do that as well. Gas station. There is an address of that gas station. Obviously, we masked that as well. So we scanned 9,000 gas stations using ATG devices. ATG is automatic tank gauge. And it also controls different alerts. And that particular, just one case. You see the mask there, that there is an address behind it. It's in the United States. And there are different commands that you can set from afar to set the level limits, the command, the overfill, overspill, shut off the controls of the gas inputs to the gas tank. Remotely, you can take it afar. If we talk about the new age of EV, electric vehicles, everybody's talking about infrastructure, about fast charging, stations, et cetera. Same thing. Remote maintenance. These devices have a number of things that are also on the verge of, on the side of privacy as well as causing damages because they're hard connected to the electric vehicle. And if you can put a malicious file on the electric vehicle electric station, every time you charge the car, you can infect the car and start withdrawing information. The first thing, the least one that we feel is stealing credentials, charging cards, credit cards, etc. But it also can cause later on, and I'm sure Alissa will talk about hacking cars, is taking control. What's a hack on a car? Taking control of the car's speed and direction. So you can see here a number of examples that start with smart cities, and everything is smart city because the connected vehicles is part of the of the smart cities. And we want to, I don't know, start the heaters at home, air conditioners from the car. We want everything we don't want to waste time. We love those gadgetries that help make a life easier and more efficient. But connectivity comes with a huge risk. So talking about R&D and executives, awareness. A lot of executives that own those assets don't even know how easy it is to hack those assets. So executives should be much more aware. And R&D. There is a paradigm shift for the R&D people before the connectivity and after the connectivity. That's the way they should look at it. It's not another phase of R&D. Cybersecurity has to be part of the architecture to begin with and not an add-on. And a lot of time, R&D people don't meet timetable, quarterly quotas, et cetera, software drop, and they always push back and they will tell you, okay, next version, we'll add the cybersecurity. Wrong. Because the deployment, the data that is transferred, the deployment of millions of units in between quarters, nobody is going to go back on the roof of a tower to change a controller that now it is connected, but that one is secured. Those controllers don't have over-the-air updates. So what do you do with huge number of devices, and the prediction is tens of billions, I'm sure. Numbers keep on piling up, and every research you read is 20 billion, 35 billion by 2025, and it doesn't matter, tens of billions. So R&D people should think different. And basically, they should think about, other than functionality, don't put your customer at risk.
You know, Alissa, you look at these slides here, and I'm sure that you've hacked into many of these devices. So I'm curious to know, what do you think is are the biggest targets in a city today?
My answer might surprise you, but I think it's less about the cameras and less about the actual devices and more about the back end. Over the last year, I've been focusing my vulnerability research on APIs. We're now, in this API economy, and that's what a lot of these devices are communicating with. A lot of people don't know this, but they think, oh, well, I'm not susceptible to being hacked because I'm not driving around in a Tesla. Well, any car made after 2001 is connected to GSM and is a target. So for my research, I was hacking into cars remotely over the internet, and actually you can move the steering wheel, push the brakes, push the gas, and in one particular test, accidentally ran the test car into the side of the building. But it is a thing, and I think industrial revolutions are inevitable. We as humans evolve, we innovate, and I think the problem is endemic to the fact that security is an afterthought, and it's not being. We need to move to this shift left sort of mindset where security is put into the development process instead of secured after it's deployed. To answer your question more directly, it's it really is the back end. That's where all the data is. A lot of the time, so for example, I'll give you guys an example of this. So I'm a typical Hollywood story. I hacked into a government network in 1997. I was caught and I was arrested, and I went to go work for the U.S. government in cyber warfare. And at the time, hacking was really around defacing websites. It was like Loki was here. But now it's changed for me as a hacker because it's one thing to deface a website. It's another thing to take remote control of your car that your family is in. And why fly a plane into a building when you can just do it from, your cave and cause just as much panic through terrorism remotely by taking remote control of it? The fact is everything's an embedded system now, and I think your first question I'll try to answer as well. I think the attack surface is being created not by the innovation, not by the embedded systems, but by the communication. By making it accessible, by giving these things that weren't historically connected an IP address, right? So you can communicate with it now. So our cars, OT equipment, I used to do hacking for a lot of the nuclear power plants like San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, and a lot of these things that were historically not connected and were sneaker net only have IP addresses. So I think that's the attack surface being created.
So what's the answer here? You go to RSA and you see startup after startup appearing, and the next year they're not there. But there's an overwhelming number of companies out there looking to solve the issue here. But is it really something that needs to be done from a federal level? Like, do we need standards? Have countries abroad figured out a way to deal with this? I would love for any of you to pipe in here.
So maybe I can start with a couple of examples, right? First of all, to complete the conversation, I think we focus a lot on the hacking aspect, which is intentional bad behavior. But when I think about cities, we also need to think about things like natural disasters. So floods, earthquakes, fires, and how to make our cities resilient, because these things may also happen, and they need to be factored into your systems. Do your systems have backup? Can they come back up in face of such a natural disaster? On the question about standards, I think there are two levels at which we can think about it. In the US, as an example, NIST has a smart city framework with a big cybersecurity pillar underneath that basically talks about some basic hygiene like authentication, encryption, all those things, right? But it also talks about the end-to-end solution aspect, because we know, just like for a chain, the strength is reflected by the weakest link. For security, it's about the end-to-end perspective. It doesn't matter how secure you make different pieces. If the entire end-to-end data flow is not secure, you are not providing security. It's as simple as that. The other example would be, I think there's collaboration between private and other private companies that needs to happen. So what we found was, we had some end devices with Intel architecture, but we also had end devices with silicon from our competitors. So we sat down, for example, with ARM, who a lot of you may think are our competitors, but we found that if we can together figure out what secure device onboarding will look like. When a device comes onto the network, it advertises itself. Let's change its default username and password. These simple things we can collaborate on. So we can compete on innovation, but we can collaborate on creating and moving the market. That is the second perspective that I think I would like to bring into this conversation. Please.
I know this is called the consumer electronics, but unfortunately, I don't think the solution lies with consumers. I don't think you can really do anything about it. So I was being interviewed by Car and Driver magazine yesterday, and this question came up. And it's not like protecting your home Wi-Fi where you're like, I'm going to go to my local Best Buy and I'm going to buy a firewall. You can't do that with your car, right? It's not like, you're like, oh, I want that E300, that Mercedes E300, and on the way home after I buy it, I'm going to stop by Best Buy and pick up an ECU firewall. It's not going to happen. Unfortunately, the solution is with the vendors. It's with the companies. And unfortunately, I think if we as consumers change the narrative, and when we're looking at cars, start to ask questions like, hey, do you know if there's any ECU firewalls in this model? Is there a mobile app? And, I think, we've been too focused on, can I Facebook while I drive? I think the questions and the pre-sales process need to change. So manufacturers and OEMs start to get it that, oh, wait a minute, consumers are making fewer decisions about the stereo system and the speakers in the car and more basing their decisions on the security of the vehicle. And I think we can help shape that narrative as consumers, but ultimately the responsibility is up to the vendors, the manufacturers, the OEMs.
Well, you're a vendor. Are there
Some ideas. So cybersecurity should be in front. I mean, think about it. I've been told. We've been in the automotive industry, involved in the automotive industry for the past 3.5 years. And you cannot depend on the regulators to do the job for you. You should be aware. Again, it's the same like C-level executives. They should be knowledgeable about the vulnerability that their own equipment may expose their own customers. But as a customer, you walk into a showroom and you have this rating for safety, right? And I've been told that 20 years ago, there was a big fight. What is a safety and how many airbags? Who needs airbag? And this seat belts 30 years ago, and now you walk in, and the first thing, at least I do, and I just bought a new car, and the first thing I asked is, I wanted all the gadgetry, the lane keeping, the emergency stopping, the adaptive cruise control, because people are distracted, and we know that close to 40,000 fatalities in the United States and road accidents are 90+% because of human errors. So you are looking for these added values equipment to overcome our destruction. But there was Senator Thune at one time when they discussed in the previous government, they discussed the Self-Driving Act about what prevents autonomous vehicles to go on the road. And he came with the idea, says, if we have done it with safety, why don't we rate a car for cybersecurity? So you walk into, stars. You want, 3 stars, 4 stars. Obviously, the industry pushed back, exactly like I was told that they pushed back on safety. But it will come. Eventually, if consumers are aware that cybersecurity is an issue, and it makes a safe platform less safe, they will require that. You talk about smart cities, infrastructure. Why would you buy a generator if it doesn't have a controller that is secured? Ask the question, is it secured or not? Look at the specs. You have so many people in the high-rising industry that are dealing with it daily. They just need to ask the questions. So knowledge, and we should be educating as much as we can, like at this conference and others, is people, cybersecurity really actually eliminates safety. And you put residents at risk if it's a high-rise building, and neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. So awareness, knowledge, ask questions, and demand. And don't wait for the regulator, although I think it's the state of California that 2 months ago published a regulation saying any IoT device installed in California should be secured. That's the start. I don't know what it means and what's the level of secured, but okay. So you start, the first question is it secured? I remember 3.5 years ago, the car is secured. How? What? Oh, our R&D people put something in place. Obviously, but that's the beginning. You got to start somewhere. So that will improve even that regulation. I see some people saying, so what does it mean? It means that there is awareness. It means that the state of California is going to be on top of it, and eventually will hire the experts to require the right things from vendors that will eventually would like to sell in the state of California, just like emission control. Eventually, there are going to be some criteria. But vendors, it should be a marketing advantage. And now going forward, saying ours is secured and differentiate yourself from the competitors. That's a beginning. That's kind of an upsell on existing equipment that is better secured.
I just want to add one more thing. Hire hackers. Hack your own stuff. One of the things that I think we can do is from several aspects is, and please don't key my car if there's any developers in the audience. It also starts with the developers. Like one big mistake I see a lot of the manufacturers, if any of you are manufacturers, OEMs, you're making a mistake by doing just cybersecurity awareness training for your entire company, but not sending your developers to secure code training. I think a lot of the onus and a lot of the responsibility falls on the developers. A lot of the things that I've seen, and you guys, some of you may be shocked by what I'm about to say, some may not, but I'm seeing vulnerabilities now that were a vulnerability 20 years ago. History repeats itself. The problem is that we've got these developers who are making these new systems, embedded systems, new applications that are running these OT and IoT devices and not realizing that you need to secure it differently, and it just really just shocking mistakes. Like, let me give you an example. So there was a really large fountain. I won't give you this is funny.
What city?
It was a very large fountain. And the fountain was actually communicating with an API server, and it was being controlled through an API. And the way it was written, the way this fountain, the controls for this large fountain was written, massive fountain. And I found that by just pulling up my laptop and actually loading up an application called Postman, which is an API client, I could actually manually send commands to the API server because it basically just was expecting certain configured commands from this fountain, from the equipment of this fountain. And I basically just threw whatever command I wanted at it, and it accepted it. This is basic logic issue, basic logic flaws, basic vulnerabilities that we were seeing like 20 years ago. Authentication and authorization, that's not happening in OT. That's not happening in IoT devices. It's just, I think that's where it needs to start, is with the developers. It needs to, don't get me wrong, I love developers, I love you. I couldn't write a line of code if, my life.
They give us a lot of business.
Yeah, but I think it needs to start there. And I'm working with a great technology. There's a lot of startups in this area who are creating these amazing security solutions for devices like Level Tech that's biometrically fingerprinting your radio frequencies on your cell phone to identify you and prevent relay attacks on cars. There's all this really great tech coming out right now to help with this problem, but unfortunately it's outside of the hands of consumers. Industry needs to get better.
So a couple of things to add. I mean, as we're discussing this is like peeling an onion, right? There's a lot more nuances to it. To summarize the conversation, there are two ways of preventing an attack. You minimize the potential attack surface, or you harden it. And I think, reducing the attack surface is all about things like authentication, encryption, thinking about data flow. The hardening comes not just from, hiring hackers is certainly an option, but within your development teams, create a red team, blue team competition. Yeah. There are a lot of established security practices that have helped us secure the enterprise. What we need to do is bring those practices out of the enterprise into the OT world. And I think that's the journey we are on. So certainly from an Intel perspective, we think of this as an ecosystem partnership. We work with startups, we work with our solution providers to make sure that we're bringing the best of everything together, because this is not about a piecemeal siloed solution that's really good at one thing. It's about securing that end-to-end data flow.
If I may?
Yes.
There is great advantage, cybersecurity-wise, there is a great advantage to the IoT sector in terms of hardening, protecting. simplifying the domain. These are single-purpose machines. It doesn't matter if it's a controller on an air conditioner, a generator, or an ECU in a car, electronic control unit in the car, or charging station for that matter. They leave the vendor with a single purpose to function exactly what the design was supposed to do. And they are not supposed to be user configurable. So if you take that in mind and you try and seal and harden at the vendor side that only authorized changes are allowed, whatever the means are, either hard connect or over the air, then it is easier to protect and harden than in the IT world. In the OT gives you that advantage, and that's the philosophy we took. It's a single-purpose machine. We work with a vendor. That's the design you want it to be. We don't care if the application is an MRI machine or air conditioner functionality or a valve to close and open. This is it. That's a design. Nobody should be able to change it. And what is a hack? Basically getting into the stack and trying to manipulate the code. And so it's not that far-fetched or difficult to get into hardening OT, IoT devices. And just need to adopt it and think about it ahead of in the architecture. Basically, it's going to end up, that's the code, let's seal it. So I think this is the approach that should be taken by R&D people.
And Ami, I'm sure you'll agree. I mean, not only should the manufacturers and OEMs of these devices be breaking their own things, hacking their own things to secure it, but also security vendors. There have been numerous penetration tests where I actually used the security device to hack the target. So, using the security control to pivot within the system, it's a thing, and security vendors, unfortunately, need to eat their own dog food, right? And we need to be cognizant. We need to be cognizant of that when even on the security side that we're hardening our own devices. Security companies are becoming victims too. We've seen that recently, where the security company or the security solution was hacked, and it was used to pivot. And then one other thing I do want to say is you can't protect what you don't know you have. So if there's anyone in the audience who's responsible for security in your city, one of the most systemic problems that I've found in my career is a lot of CISOs don't know what's out there. They don't have asset catalogs. They don't know how many CCTV cameras are out there. They don't know who's responsible for patching them. That's a huge problem. Usually it's the security team pointing at infrastructure and infrastructure pointing their fingers at security, and no one took responsibility for patching. So there were all these unpatched CCTV cameras out there. So, know what you've got so you can secure it, right? The most common response from CISOs is, that we didn't know about that server. It was out there, no one was patching it, we don't even use it, but it was hacked. And it's still your fault, because why didn't you know it existed? That's your job to know what's out there on the network. So, food for thought.
Okay, well, we have about 16 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask some of the members, the speakers up here? If not, I'll just keep asking questions. Okay, well, in the meantime, I got some. And, something that strikes me, we're seeing how the power really lies in the consumer for driving the market change here. But at the same time, we have misinformation out there. This week with the Las Vegas compromise, I even mistakenly called it a hack. And I remember the director of IT was like, no, we weren't hacked, it was a compromise. And I'm just wondering how does that impact the public perception out there? Is it as bad of a storm as we're seeing in the news, in your opinion?
I'm sure you guys have some input on this, but coming from a breaker side, I can tell you that there is a lot of FUD, that's fear, uncertainty, and doubt created out there. Unfortunately, we were just having this conversation. Social media is a great thing, but unfortunately, it gives a microphone to everybody. And, so it's very easy for misinformation to get spread out there about something. And it really is become kind of like guilty until proven innocent. And with cyber, it's already a labyrinthine thing for, a Joe consumer on Main Street to understand and wrap their brains around. Unfortunately, it is a problem. Misinformation, I'm trying not to say fake news, but okay.
Well, you said it.
So I mean, it is a problem, and unfortunately, what needs to happen is, you guys need to rely on things like dark reading. Twitter isn't necessarily an accurate news source for everything. You've got dark reading, you've got these, news outlets that are responsible journalism to make sure that, okay, the facts around this case were not what you thought they were. Happened with the whole bank hack with AWS. You guys read about that. There was misinformation spread about the fact that the hacker was, she had access because she was an employee of AWS, right? And that's how she was able to hack the banks as 3 buckets. But, misinformation, it's very important to make sure that we're communicating facts. And we as practitioners have a huge responsibility here to make sure that what's being put out there is accurate, especially vendors.
Yeah, I mean, to complement what Alissa shared, I think I'm certainly an engineer at heart, and so we tend to follow the logic path when it comes to sharing information, updating our constituents in a city on what happened, what did not happen. The reality is it's more of an emotional conversation, which means if you are talking to your constituents for the first time when an incident happened, you're already at a big disadvantage. Your trust with people living in the city has to start way before that. And you have to do things like, one recommendation I give to city agencies is you should always take the first step forward and publish what I would call a data manifesto. A data manifesto is a simple one-pager that basically says, here is the data we are collecting, here is the data we are managing, and here is what it will be used for. It's not a 15-page document that even a lawyer can barely understand, right? It's something that everybody can understand. And the reason this is important is our human brains have evolved in a way where when we don't have information, we assume the worst. It's an evolutionary trait in our brains. So we need to make sure that we are creating trust and we are giving people information and they're buying into what you're doing with the infrastructure, with the data, way ahead of when a potential incident happened. Mm-hmm. And if you have done that pre-due diligence, when an incident happens and you put out a tweet or an update, people will believe you. Otherwise, somebody who's spreading misinformation or misinterpreting intentionally or unintentionally would have created an impression, and then you have to undo that impression and then get your story out. So this communication, this trust, this engagement with the constituents is absolutely critical. And it's as important as all the technical aspects that we just talked about.
Okay, great. Well, we have one question over there.
Good morning. Name is Marcus Hervey from Secure Apps. I had a question for the panel. I wanted to know what type of metrics or KPIs should cities use to kind of measure and manage their security level, or disaster recovery or resiliency?
I guess I'll take that first. KPIs, this is an amazing question. I love this question. There's actually a lot of great work being put into establishing KPIs for cybersecurity. One of the things that I like to track are what's the mean time to detection, right? So remember, it's 2020. It's not if you're going to get hacked, it's when. So people need to stop freaking out when somebody gets hacked. It's like, oh my God, they got hacked. Yeah, it's going to happen. But how quickly can you detect that adversary on the network once it happens? So tracking that, mean time to detection, lowering that dwell time. Right? Dwell time is how long was the adversary on the system or on the network before they were detected. The next thing you should want to track, how quickly do you patch vulnerabilities as soon as they're published, right? So, if especially for the cybersecurity folks out there, you have these CERT advisories. You guys saw that whole Iran thing that happened over the weekend where Iran was making the cyber attack threats that notice how quickly did you become vigilant when notices like that come out? When a new patch is released, when a new version of your CCTV camera, new firmware comes out for your embedded system, how quick are you to update and patch them, right? So there's the release of a vulnerability or announcement of a vulnerability, the time it takes for people to weaponize that vulnerability, right? Then there's the patch time, right? The time it takes for the manufacturer to make a patch. Right? Hopefully, the 0 days or the 0-day exploits or whatever they may be, that those come after the patch. But sometimes it doesn't always happen that way with responsible disclosure. Sometimes vulnerabilities are weaponized and active exploitation happens before the manufacturer can even make a new firmware update. So, tracking that time to update your devices once new releases are made.
Great.
So a couple of pointers. One is I refer to the NIST standard around smart cities. I think it's got a checklist on cybersecurity. That's always a great point to start. It's easy to access. So I would recommend looking at that. The other area, which is a bit of work in progress, is as we are thinking about our infrastructure in physical and digital terms in parallel, I think we have to think about physical security and cybersecurity in a similar manner. I don't think this has been well understood. Who has physical access through a badge card reader into a certain area is as important as who can hack remotely into a particular machine. And I think partly, and this is not a technology issue. I think it's a people issue. The folks who are well versed in physical security are typically not well versed in digital security and vice versa. So I think what we need to do is, as an ecosystem, we need to figure out how to bring those minds together and find some best-in-breed practices and hopefully over time checklists and KPIs. It's not done yet. I think we're at the start of that journey.
One thing I would like to add, sorry, I'm like hijacking this panel. So another thing I want to add is one huge problem I'm seeing a lot of cities do is putting everything on one flat network. Please stop doing that. It's not 1990 anymore, okay? One of the things that you'll notice is that when a city or network is flat, if you hack one of the devices, the adversary has free rein to pivot to everything, right? Segment your network. Use micro-segmentation. Your CCTV cameras should not be on the same network as the other mission-critical devices, right? A la Target. Did we not remember what happened with Target? HVAC systems on the same network as point-of-sale systems? Stop the flat network thing. That's a huge recommendation I can make you. As every pen test, I've done about 200 penetration tests in my career, and it was successful in every single instance. But one of the things that I can tell you is that I pivot. The first thing I do is I get a foothold on the network and I scan for everything. I start up a sniffer, I see what's talking to what, and I scan and look for devices. If you segment your network and make sure that you just have a network for the cameras, you just have a network for your HVAC, you just have a network for your AC or whatever systems are your badge readers, you're limiting how far I can actually pivot in the network. So micro-segmentation.
Okay, great. How do you see the security landscape just further evolving for cities? As more technology comes into play, and we're kind of removing the human interface in a way with artificial intelligence, but I presume we see it worsening the security landscape. Is that fair to say?
I think there are two ways of looking at it. First is we've watched this movie before, right? I talked about the security challenges in an enterprise and how we've gone through it and we've found answers. I'm pretty confident we will find the answers to these thorny issues, but it's going to be a bit of a journey. You made a very important point, but a subtle point, which is as technology evolves, the next phase of technology will fade into the background. I think in the first phase, we have increased our interaction with the technology. It's been a lean-in experience. If I want to find an information, I get on the phone, I click on something, I get that information. The next phase of development is technology working in the background, certainly using artificial intelligence, but minimizing explicit interaction, which means security becomes even more paramount because you are not actively interacting with everything. You may not be notified if something goes wrong. So I think we have some best-known methods from enterprise security that we can certainly leverage. And when I look at the upside of what we are bringing to the community, to the society, using all these devices, I think the popular opinion will be that I need more of this, not less of this. And then if I go back to the enterprise, initially, when people wanted to, the CIOs would say, I don't need you to bring your own device into my network, right? Into the enterprise. And then what happened? People started uploading files into Dropbox. And the CIOs realize they need to not just secure, they need to secure to enable. And I think we'll have to take the same mindset with IoT devices in cities to say, we need to secure to enable, because not enabling is not an option. There is far too much upside. There are far too big challenges. We outlined the data challenges, the urbanization challenges. And I think this will become a political issue over time, and I think this will get the attention it deserves. But to me, the path is very clear. There are some bumps along the way that we need to be mentally prepared for. Some examples you gave, what happens when those things happen? Outages happen or hacks happen. We need to be prepared for them. We need to be prepared to respond to them quickly. But what we don't need to do is slow down. We cannot afford to slow down the innovation, because the downside of that far outweighs some of the risks that are coming up.
I think cities are going to sort of get rid of the whole electricity thing. I think cities are going to just stop using electricity. And I'm kidding. Homing pigeons. No, look, security is not a technology problem, it's a human problem, right? I don't think technology is the issue. I don't think IP addresses are the issue. I don't think any of that is the issue. I think we are the issue. And I think what needs to happen is we need to change how technology is developed. The SDLC and DevSecOps, needs to change. Basically, I really feel like we need to start placing more emphasis on the secure coding training. I've talked to so many CISOs where, it was a budget issue. How can you not have a budget? You probably spend more on toilet paper, than to train your developers on how to write secure code. And I think the vulnerabilities are not being created by the IP addresses and the connectivity and the embedded system. The vulnerabilities are being created by us. We're the vulnerability. We're the problem.
I think state of mind should be that vulnerabilities will always be there. And not overruling the better education on the better job by R&D people. Be aware of vulnerabilities, and I can throw numbers on 100 million lines of code in a car nowadays, and there is a rule of thumb, every 1,800 lines of code, there is a vulnerability embedded. If the state of mind is let's try and eliminate, you're going to be in a tail chase situation which was going to overrun you. If the state of mind is no, we know vulnerabilities are there, and zero-day attacks will exploit them, try and decouple the ability to get into those vulnerabilities. Harden the vulnerabilities with the good code from being compromised and exploited. If this is a state of mind, you're probably going to be more successful in every device. At the end of the day, it's the last controller that gets into differentiate between a successful attack or unsuccessful attack to take over command of those devices behind the controllers. Vulnerabilities are there, will be there forever, no matter what people will do, because hackers will find a way in. Not this way, the other way. So try and decouple. Try and eliminate. And it's not a firewall. Try to harden the existing code with the vulnerabilities from being exploited.
Great. Okay. Well, we actually only have about a minute left, but I do see we have a question over here. Do you think you can get it out fast?
Quick question. So just to kind of follow up on what you said a minute ago about network segmentation. Typically, what I've seen is that segmentation goes on when a company is trying to do more compliance, like a PCI compliance or HIPAA compliance, and then they'll bring the pen testing in. Outside of that, have you seen any best practices where cities can say, or organizations can say, hey, we're going to do this segmentation because it's the best thing to do, as opposed to just being compliance driven? Or is there possible that there are trends for having compliance just for a best practice for your environment?
Mark my words, compliance is not security, and I'm always saying that, right? Compliance is not security. Have I seen it? Very little. The fact of the matter is there's been a lot of innovation in network segmentation. Before you had to do it at the switch level. Now there's software-based microsegmentation. Hit me up offline if anyone wants to know more about that.
Great. Okay. Well, anyway, our clock just finished here, and I think our live stream is done as well. But thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Honestly, one thing I took away from this is that cities really need to invest in micro-segmentation for their networks, and that attacks are going to happen. It's just how you prepare for it and how you deal with the aftermath. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.